This is the Read to Lead podcast, episode 518.
In corporate America, we have a bias toward in-person, real-time conversation, and the people who think quick on their feet, quote unquote, or who can distill ideas into 3 succinct bullet points, tend to be heard. And so there's a lot of coaching of you then, therefore, need to speak and talk like that. And if you aren't getting heard, it's because you aren't doing that skill set enough.
Having a seat at the table doesn't mean your voice is actually welcome. Knowing something is wrong doesn't mean it's easy to speak up. In fact, there are incentives for many of us to stay silent. Why speak up if you know that it won't be received well and often makes things worse? Hello there, my name is Jeff, and this is the Read to Lead podcast. It's, of course, the podcast that's dedicated to your personal and professional growth. I'm excited this week to bring you a book that is so new it's not even out yet, but it will be this time next week. It comes out 1 week from today, March 19th, and it's called Unlearning Silence: How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully. It's written by Elaine Lynn Herring. Elaine and I will be chatting about how peer pressure and our valuing sameness over uniqueness plays a role in how we silence ourselves, some of the ways that we unintentionally oftentimes silence others, what she means when she says that unlearning silence isn't always about speaking up, and much, much more. Hey, if you love reading books as much as I do and are looking for a community of people to talk with about those books you're reading, then look no further than the Read to Lead community online. You'll find it when you go to mynameplus.me. It's jeffbrown.me. There you'll find several hundred people who gather on occasion to talk about topics like leadership, productivity, habits, mindset, communication, and more. We bring in a monthly guest expert each month. In fact, our guest expert in 2 days is our guest today on the podcast. So you even have a chance to meet and ask questions of some of the authors that appear right here on the Read to Lead podcast. In fact, if you like what you hear today from Elaine and would relish the chance to get to know her, to get to meet her, to ask questions of her yourself, which again happens on Thursday, you can start up a free 2-week trial of Read to Lead Plus right now and attend that session on Thursday absolutely free. After the trial, after 2 weeks, it's just $9 a month. You can't beat it if you ask me. But even if you go away in 2 weeks, you still get to hang out with Elaine on Thursday, plus a session with me next week. Again, to sign up, to check it out, to find out more, just go to jeffbrown.me. Elaine Lynn Herring is a facilitator, speaker, and writer. She works with organizations and individuals to build skills in communication, collaboration, and conflict management. In her career, she's worked on 6 continents and with a wide range of corporate, government, and nonprofit clients. She's trained mental health professionals, political officials, religious communities, and leaders at companies including American Express, Capital One, Google, Nike, Shell, Pixar, and the Red Cross. She's a former managing partner of Triad Consulting Group and a lecturer at Harvard Law School, specializing in dispute resolution, mediation, and negotiation. Her new book is called Unlearning Silence: How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully. Well, Elaine, I'm excited to have you here. This is a book that I think is much needed and on a topic that we don't hear much at all about. Welcome to the Read to Lead podcast.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, you divide this book, and we're going to dive into most every chapter at least a little bit. You divide the book into 2 parts. We've got awareness and we've got action. So we'll start with where you start. And you say in the book, the first part focuses on raising our individual and collective awareness of the silence we swim in and contribute to every single day. So talk about first how we learn silence on a multitude of levels.
Yeah, I'm actually going to take one step back and define what we're talking about with silence. As you said, it's not something we're talking a whole lot about. So not only because I'm trained as a lawyer, let's get a good definition of terms, working definition of terms going, because there's so much of, silence is important. We need to take a pause. You can't meditate or be mindful without silence. All of that is true and good. That's not the silence I'm talking about. The
Mm,
silence I'm talking about is when there's not enough room in the conversation for your real thoughts and preferences, when
mm,
you're not invited to the meeting, when you feel like you have to edit out parts of yourself in order to keep your seat at the table, in
mm,
order to stay in the relationship. That silence is the silence that I would argue is really damaging and yet is so pervasive. And we've never really had a name for it. We haven't called it silence. And so it manifests just as
mm,
this discomfort or personal deficiency that, I think I'm not good enough. If I could figure out how to communicate my idea more clearly to Jeff, then he would give me the promotion
mm,
versus what's really going on here. So I wanted to offer language and a more nuanced analysis of what many of us are
mm,
dealing with. And what I think we're dealing with is from the families that we were raised in to the ways that we were addressed in school or punished
mm,
at school or rewarded at school. We are taught to at times ignore our own thoughts, feelings, needs, preferences. Now, to exist as a kind human being in the world, we of course need to consider other people.
sure.
But many of us over rotate where then we're not thinking at all about what do I think? What do I need? And that has real damaging impacts that we can talk about.
Mm,
So we learn silence because someone told us to shut up. Or when I tried to make that comment in the meeting, the conversation moved on as if I didn't actually say anything.
mm.
Or my first boss shot me a look. They didn't actually have to say anything,
Right.
right? And we all know that look, whether it is from a parent or a
Mm,
colleague or a community member, right? We said something, we
mm,
showed up, and they shot us that look, and we went, I
mm,
guess that part of me is not okay here. That part of me is not acceptable. I have to edit that part out. I have to hide it. And so we learn to silence ourselves. We learn to silence our own thoughts. And of course, in the workplace, we're often rewarded for that, right? Don't rock the boat.
mm,
Be easy to work with. Be a team
mm.
player often means to conform. There are positive sides of that. There are
Yeah.
negative sides of that, and want to be really honest in our analysis of what's happening. And is this really how we each want to show up?
Mm. Yeah, that look you talk about, I've gotten that from my wife on a number of occasions,
Yes. Yes.
or a kick in the shin under the
I was just going
table.
to ask, does it come with an accompanying kick under the
Yeah,
table?
yeah. Oftentimes it does, and sometimes deservedly. So
Yes.
the chapter 2 was interesting to me in that you share a bit about it having been difficult for you to write.
Mm.
Talk about the problem with silence. You've hinted at some of this, but then why it was a hard one for you to write in particular.
Everyone says that writing a book turns you inside out. My experience is that writing a book on unlearning silence while unlearning your own silence at least feels next level.
Mm,
My own career path is that I went to Harvard Law School intending to be a litigator, came across negotiation pedagogy and theory, taught for more than a decade globally, frameworks and tools created by other people out of the Harvard Negotiation Project, getting to yes, difficult conversations,
mm,
all things that I think are really useful.
mm,
It also is what led me to the observation of, well, some people still don't negotiate. Some people still don't have the difficult conversations, even though they spend a lot of money and time for this training. What's going on? And that's actually how I landed at, well, we've learned silence and we each silence each other.
mm,
So if we really want to unlock the other skills and talents, we need to solve for silence. And that actually maps my own journey of, at some level, I think I always thought that my worth and my value came from the content that I taught. So
mm,
it wasn't that I was smart or I had ideas of my own, but I was really good at amplifying and propagating other people's ideas. And in that, where is that? Where is there room for your own voice? You're here just in function. And that, as I worked with clients, mapped so many people's experiences,
wow.
right? You're not here for your humanity or for what you can bring. You're here for your utility. Do your job. And your job is not to challenge the status quo, but to perpetuate it.
Mm,
And so all the things I talk about in chapter 2, the self-doubt, the toxicity, your body, when you have to edit yourself, your body is on chronic high alert, right? It's a threat scanner and
Mm,
danger. And that happens so often in workplaces when you don't fit in or aren't seen as part of the inside crew. You're inherently othered, and that manifests in cardiovascular disease, that manifests in hair loss and rash. And our
mm,
bodies weren't meant, our bodies are wise, and we weren't meant to chronically be on high alert.
mm,
So, all of that is part of my own experience of do I have a voice of my own?
mm,
If I do, what does it look like? And if you haven't traditionally or historically had a voice of your own, voice is a status claiming activity. So for you to have a voice means that other people need to adjust around that. That's
mm,
deeply uncomfortable for everyone involved, right? We
mm,
know
mm.
our roles. Jeff speaks, his wife kicks or shoots him, right? We have our clear roles. Why would we mess with that?
Right.
Except, how do we honor each other's humanity?
Mm,
And at work, how do we really acknowledge that if innovation is what's going to get us to tomorrow, not just preserve today, that at the heart of innovation is difference and difference of perspective.
mm,
So, really wading through all those different layers, but also really grateful for the small experiments along the way of pitching the book to publishers, having them be interested, talking about it with clients, seeing it resonate, and certainly coming to believe for myself, maybe I do have a voice. Maybe I do have something to add. And this is the first commercial book on silence
mm,
because there's been plenty of psychological and sociological research about it, but there's no mainstream discussion about this topic, although we see it in our lives, right? We see it at
mm.
Thanksgiving dinner. I'm going to bite my tongue. I'm not going to see you till next year. Maybe I'll sit at the kids' table next year so I don't have to talk with you.
Been there.
Yep. Yep. Can't kick you there.
Yeah. This is a bit of a tangent, but something you said made me think of this. I teach a course, typically a live cohort called Note Making Mastery, where we walk people through how to collect, connect, crystallize, and create. Collect the things you're learning into a central hub, a second brain. It's sometimes referred to.
Mm-hmm.
Connecting new ideas to existing ideas and allowing for serendipitous, seemingly disparate things to crash into one another serendipitously, oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
And then the crystallized phase is what I thought of when you were talking, and this is something so many people struggle with, and that's taking the things you learn from other people
Mm-hmm.
and making them your own. I mean, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. We've all been impacted by what we've learned from other people, but the hard part oftentimes is putting that in our own voices, is taking things we've learned from others and creating with them in such a way that we feel like they're uniquely our own. And I think in the case of reading, in the case of books, in the case of online articles and whatnot, one of the things I try to get people to understand, and maybe you have some thoughts on this. Again, this is a bit of a tangent, but when it comes to reading a book or taking notes on something that you're learning, I try to encourage people to be very careful about not to simply write down verbatim what the author said, but instead force yourself to put it in your own words, or think about, how would I explain this if I were trying to teach it to a 12-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
Does that resonate at all with you? Or
I would actually take it one step further, which is to say that paraphrase, putting it in your own words, helps with understanding and processing of your own. I would also say, as you're reading, as you're metabolizing, what's missing? And also, what do I think about this? Because it's not just what Jeff says or Elaine says, but do I agree with this? Do I disagree with it? There is no keeper or bearer of all truth. We can have a whole separate conversation about that. So we'll just put that as a premise, right? Even if there is a book that is, there's interpretation around it.
Sure.
Right. So it is, how do I metabolize the thought that someone else is communicating? And how do I interrogate it for myself to say, what do I think about this? What seems missing? And that interrogation is a lot of what often is missing. And I've worked with a lot of really wise people and a lot of really smart people, and they too are only human. So if we take that premise that everyone is human, their view is legitimate because it comes from them, it is also limited because they are but one person.
Right, right.
Which begs the question then, what do I see? What do I think? And that, what do I see? What do I think? What do I want to do about it? That is your voice.
Mm.
So, really wanting each of us to remember we do have a voice for how we want to move through this world and how we can impact the world. Our jobs isn't just to regurgitate or even put in our own words someone else's thought. It is really to contextualize and interrogate and add to, right? That adding is how we
Yeah.
continue to make progress together.
Yeah, I love that. What do I think and what's missing are just two really fantastic questions to ask in the midst of that process. Thank you for sharing that. I knew you'd have some incredible value to add
Of course.
to that. What do you mean when you say that unlearning silence isn't always about speaking up? Because when I first dove into the book, that's kind of I just assumed it was about speaking up more often, but it's not just that, is it?
Well, the reality is the world is too noisy for that.
Right.
Right? We don't actually. We all have those people in our lives too. We might be shooting them the looks of can you right? And there are some other people who have written that book.
Yeah.
But that is also the reality, which is unlearning silence does not mean saying everything you think and feel because it's not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
It is too noisy and too busy of a world, but also there are real costs to saying what you think and feel. And so chapter 3 is all about the benefits of silence, really wanting to honor that silence is often a strategic move. It is often a way of caring for yourself, self-preservation. Because if I am already the only female, only Asian person, only fill in the blank subordinate identity, my status and seat at the table is already more tenuous. So I may not want to stick out even further. So really wanting to honor the ways in which many of us have used silence as a survival mechanism. This plays into, relationships at home too, and trauma responses in abusive relationships. Yeah. To say just speak up all the time ignores those realities. And for me, the difference between silence that is additive or oppressive is agency. Am I choosing to stay silent because it is better for me, for taking care of myself, for keeping the job that I need to pay my bills? Or is it because I feel like I have to stay silent? And that, whether you're choosing it or whether it's chosen for you, makes a difference.
My wife's past, having come from an abusive relationship, there were things about that I did not learn until 10 or 12 years into our marriage. It was that long before she was comfortable in talking about them.
This is also why marriage is a minefield.
It is. Yes, it is. And she got to a point where, as she evolved through that process, she went from being silent about it for 12 to 15 years to engaging in speaking about it publicly to other women, and to see the impact that has made on those women and the positive things that have come from that has just been incredible to see in her, and the bravery that's taken to go from one extreme to the other, basically, has been just an amazing journey to watch.
That's beautiful. And let me just highlight from an analytical perspective why it's so powerful. Because our silence is not just about us. Our silence also perpetuates silence, right? The less that we talk about the abusive relationships because we want to preserve someone else's reputation, because I don't want to stir it up in my, any number of reasons, the more everyone else who has gone through that exact same dynamic thinks that they are alone. And there's all this research around social isolation and loneliness, and it's being as damaging on one's health as smoking or cancer, which is mind-blowing, right? Thank you, Surgeon General, for that research. So in the book, I talk about it as double pain. Like in Mario Kart, there's a badge where you can amplify the pain inflicted on your Mario Kart character. But our silence is actually that double pain, because I cannot take away the initial pain of the abuse in the relationship. But there's an additional layer of pain that comes from suffering in silence, thinking that it was me or only me. Even if we can't solve for that initial pain, we can solve for the secondary pain by being in conversation with people we trust, in context driven by our own agency of when, where, and with whom we want to talk about it, that has such a balm and a gift, impact of being a gift to people who hear about it. That's what I hear when I hear your wife's story, that she, in sharing her story, allows other people to address that pain from the loneliness, isolation, and suffering in silence.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. I want to wrap up our discussion on awareness, the awareness section of the book, with this question. And you've referenced this. I'd love for you to go into a bit more detail, if you could. What are some of the ways that we, and often unintentionally, silence other people without even realizing?
In the book, there are 9 ways. Let me go with 2 here. Number 1 is forgetting how hard it is to actually speak up or use your voice. If you have grown up with people hearing you out, respecting what you have to say, being invited to meetings, then we tend to assume that that is true for everyone. And that is not everyone's lived experience. One of my favorite stories that came up in a workshop setting that I was facilitating was a Hispanic woman sharing that her family didn't have a lot of money, but they always saw McDonald's commercials. That advertisement with the crispy golden French fries, this was the dream. So they saved up their money, went to McDonald's, ordered the French fries, so excited. The order came up, French fries were cold and limp. Do you say something? She wanted to go back and tell the McDonald's folks, this is not what I saw in the advertisement.
Right.
And her sister said, shh, don't cause a fuss. We're now 40 years later. She's the CEO of an organization, right? Talk about learned silence and the stories we carry that are often our subconscious, but impact how we show up. And her colleague, a man, was so aware in hearing the story of, wow, I have never had that experience. I never would have thought that it would have been hard or inappropriate to go back to ask for warm French fries or hot French fries. One way that we silence other people is fundamentally underestimating how hard it can be or is, or in what ways our culture has acculturated us to be silent about our own thoughts and certainly about our own needs. That's one. The second is something very practical and tangible, which is just what medium are we communicating in? In corporate America, we have a bias toward in-person real-time conversation, and the people who think quick on their feet, quote unquote, or who can distill ideas into 3 succinct bullet points tend to be heard. And so there's a lot of coaching of you then therefore need to speak and talk like that. And if you aren't getting heard, it's because you aren't doing that skill set enough. We are all wired as different people. There are some people who process best real time in conversation. There are some people who are absolutely brilliant, that they are post processors, right? After the meeting is when the brilliant idea is going to come. And actually, I think better, and I'm one of these people, if I can type than talk. And if we are only willing to hear ideas presented in one preferred medium, we're missing out on so many other ideas and perspectives that could save a ton of head and heartache. So one way we silence people is insisting on one specific way, communication medium that has got to be real-time conversation. Instead, I would advise and challenge us, can we design our communication flows, right? If we all think better asynchronously, are we in Google Docs? Are we in Slack? Are we doing a combination of things? Instead of making the decision in the meeting, if we have the luxury of time, do we say, all right, here's the placeholder. Everybody sleep on it so everyone can post-process. Let's come back tomorrow and see what comes up. Or if something comes up, put it in chat. If nothing comes up, that's the direction we'll go. It allows for greater voice to show up. And essentially, we're optimizing for voice.
And I know, if I'm being honest, I often judge written communication when I see, punctuation isn't quite right, or, they didn't capitalize that letter, or, I mean, especially with text. I'm very prim and proper when it comes to written communication, and I sit down at a keyboard and I speak very formally in that realm. And I find myself, without realizing it, oftentimes judging how other people communicate when they don't do it the way I would do it.
which is the human condition,
Yeah, yeah.
right? The way I do it is easiest for me.
Right.
But because I'm a different person, it does not mean it's easiest for someone else.
Right, right. Too, as you were talking, I remembered or became aware of a way I silenced myself recently in a way, or at least silenced my voice. Well, I'll just share the situation, and you can riff on it if you want. I picked up my car recently from the shop, and then ended up having to take it back for another issue. But then a secondary issue was when I got the car back the first time, the driver's side door panel was covered in grease.
Mm-hmm.
And when we took the car back, the place was closed, and so I had to write, notes about why I was bringing it back. And one of the notes was, and this was hard for me to write. One of the notes was, "Hey, and can you do something about the grease? Or next time, can you make sure that it's not covered in grease?" Well, my wife and I went by the shop this morning as I dropped her off to work, since we're down to one car, and I thought that we were just going to stop. She was going to grab something out of the car and move on, but we needed to go inside. I won't share all the details. I didn't want to go in because I knew by now they've read my note about the grease, and I didn't want to face
face the music.
Yeah, face the. How silly is that? I mean, I was like, I was able to write it and then leave. That was great. I could do that. But if I had gone in and they had been there, and it had been face to face, I probably would not have mentioned the grease issue. It was because I could write it and leave the note and walk away that I even say anything about it to begin with.
There's so much there. And I'll ask the question, then we can decide whether we're psychoanalyzing you
right.
live.
Right.
Why wouldn't you have said something in person in real time?
Yeah, and it goes to something you talk about in the book, and I think in my mind I would say, well, does it really matter in the whole scheme of things? Is it really that big of a deal? Mm-hmm. Am I making a mountain out of a molehill? Or are they going to think of that about me? Mm-hmm. All those kinds of things were playing in my mind.
All of it. All of it. And this is why, going back to our earlier conversation, unlearning silence is not about saying everything all the time, because you have other things to do. Right? How much does the grease really matter to you? Do you want to take this on today? How are they going to react? Are they doing, is this a customer service thing where you're actually giving them feedback? What are you asking them to do? Is it an FYI? Don't want your other customers to be worried about this in the future? Or are you asking for a discount? Right? There's 1,000 different considerations that I'd argue only you can make, because only you know what else is on your plate and whether telling them about the grease. By the way, if you want to mention the name of this institution now, then all your readers and listeners can be aware of that. But only you know whether that makes sense for you to raise and for you to tackle, and in what way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that bit of coaching there, and then psychoanalysis. I appreciate it. Wasn't planning
Thanks
to go
for
there.
Being game.
Yeah. There are some strategies that you share in the book that you call anchors that can help us when we need to speak up. Can you dig into some of those anchors that you talk about in the book for us?
Absolutely. This is chapter 7 of using your voice. And often people are like, how do I do it? And there are lots of books that say these are the words that you say. And I don't subscribe to that train of thought, because you don't want to sound like me. You don't want to sound like Jeff. You want to sound like you. Right. But what I think is universally helpful is a couple of anchors, so that as the waves of self-doubt and other people's reactions come, you have something to grasp onto. One is start with why. Why does it matter enough for you to go back and talk to the mechanic?
Right.
And Keegan and Leahy of Harvard would say, there has to be something that matters more in order for you to be willing to embark on change or change your behavior. So is it because you don't want someone else to go through the same thing? Is it because you really care about your child? Is it because of justice? What is that? Or you want to be healthier? What is the bigger why? And being clear of, it's worth it to me to take on the risk of discomfort or difference because there's a why, a purpose that matters. Second is connect the dots. Unfortunately, we do not all think the same way. Starting from, we don't have access to the same information and data. And, the story in the book is about my husband and I not seeing things the same way when it comes to cleaning the toilet, fondly termed toilet gate,
I remember that story.
and having to spell it out for someone, which can feel
Yeah.
really frustrating. Like, why don't you just get it? I'm not talking theoretically to my husband as I say that with exasperation, I promise. But we each see things differently. So, how do I connect the dots for you and also be curious about how you're thinking about things is another anchor, right? Of having to spell things out is actually pretty natural because, again, we're all different human beings. The third is make your ask clear. What
Mm,
are you really asking for here? So often there's a mismatch, and this happens in marriages all the time. And there's a YouTube video about it's not the nail. But, are you looking for someone to listen to you and just hear you out? Are
mm,
you looking for someone to problem solve with you? Are you looking for them to go advocate for you? Are you looking for them to fix what is it that you're looking for? If you can articulate that and make the ask clear, it increases the likelihood the other person can actually show up well for you
mm.
rather than trying to figure out, do you just want me to listen? Oh, I'm like trying to problem solve, but now you're getting pissed at me. What's going on? And now we're, we've changed the topic. There's so much implication about silence in marriage if we picked up on that. The fourth anchor is embrace resistance.
Mm,
To expect, again, because we're different, that there is going to be pushback. Pushback doesn't mean the end of the conversation. It means that there is more curiosity, more understanding necessary. And in the research, resistance is actually part of the voice cultivation process.
mm.
Resistance is actually engagement. You hear this from salespeople of even getting a no reply is still a reply, so you can
Right.
engage again.
Hmm.
But so many of us get thrown off, or because someone demonstrates resistance to us and our idea, then we shut down and revert to silence versus thinking, how do I embrace that? Okay, what concerns do you have? What would need to be true for you to get to yes or to be open to this idea? Knowing intellectually that resistance is just going to come up and be part of the process helps you stay more grounded in the moment and
Mm,
continue to move forward and engage. So start with why, connect the dots, make the ask clear, and embrace resistance. Different handholds and anchors as you navigate this messy work.
so practical and actionable. Thank you.
Mm.
I've got a couple of questions in the time we have left, Elaine, that I want to ask that aren't directly related to the book necessarily. But before I do that, what haven't I asked you from the book that you want to make sure that we walk away with?
One of the questions I often get is, do I even have a voice? Right? I'm just an employee. I'm a middle manager. I'm the newest member to the executive team. I'm the CEO. My hands are tied because of the board. Right? Wherever we're situated,
Yeah.
there's always inputs from other people. And so it can very much feel like, do I have a voice? Or if I've been solving for other people's problems and issues, needs, and concerns, where's there room for me?
Mm,
So I would just reiterate that our voice is not just the words that we say, but how we move through the world.
mm,
And each of our choices, whether to write that note to the mechanic or not, how we respond when someone shoots us that look or not, makes a difference for how you live your own life
mm,
and how you're shaping the circles of influence that you have around you. So, really encouraging each of us to live intentionally, right?
mm,
If you have one life, how do you want to live? That is your voice. That is the impact that you will have in your life and your leadership.
mm. Well, speaking of impact, I would be curious to know what books, this being the Read to Lead podcast,
Mm.
what books have come across your path that
Mm.
have had a particular impact on you?
Microactivism by Omkari Williams. I came across it on LinkedIn. And the reason I love it is the subtitle is How Can You Make a Difference in the World Without a Bullhorn?
Mm,
This gets to this idea of to be an activist, which activism is having impact.
mm,
It seems like all of us are supposed to be protesting on the streets or yelling, speaking up. And so for so many of us, that doesn't feel like that's not me.
mm,
And the idea of microactivism is if we each want to have impact, Omkari's advice is pick two causes that you really care about and be consistent with them. Small acts with big results over time. And I found that so wise because it feels a little bit like getting pulled in every direction, right? I should care about literacy. I should care about ending poverty in this country and that country. I should care about, I don't know, the PTA is trying to tell me what I should care about too. And by the way, I have a full-time job and all these roles, and we're spread so thin, and that can also lead us to inaction. But actually, me showing up at the food pantry or me organizing that event regularly every week or every 2 weeks does make a difference in shaping the world around us. So I highly recommend microactivism.
Love it. Love it. That's a book I was not familiar with, so I'm going to be checking that one out. Thanks for highlighting it. I had some great advice earlier for note takers or the note makers of the world that I call them with regard to some fantastic questions we can ask, especially in that crystallized phase of the process, I call it. Something a little bit more tactical. I'd love to know with regard to your personal knowledge management. How do you, let's say, collect and connect? So when it comes to things that you come across that you read or study and you want to remember, you want to make sure it gets tucked away so that you can go back to it later, possibly massage it, use it in your own work. What are some of the methods you use to navigate that process?
I'm going to share this as a matter of not staying silent about it, even though I'm slightly ashamed about it.
Okay.
But I share it. Let me give you the punchline. Yeah. The punchline to me is do what is actually sustainable and works for you. Because there's great inspiration and advice from different people. And I've tried a lot of the different organizing systems and methods that I've read about, and I couldn't sustain them. And so I went back to what has worked because it seems to have worked well enough for me.
Right.
So here is my pretty low tech, not optimally organized way of taking notes. Take my phone. I email myself.
You're not the first to say they do that.
Okay, good. So, if I'm reading a book, I literally have a draft email open with the title of the book and the author's name. And then I'm putting bullet points in as I read. And if I pause, I save it as a draft. Yeah. When I'm done reading the book, I send it to myself. And my inbox really is my second brain, for better or worse, because there is Control F and you can find most things there.
Yeah. Built-in search, what it is today is fantastic. Yeah. That's actually, I think, going to be useful for a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that. That's not as embarrassing as you started to make it sound. I actually kind of like that idea.
I am in a season of life of really valuing whatever works. Glad if it can be helpful.
Well, the book, again, is called Unlearning Silence, How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully. Her name is Elaine Lynn Herring. Elaine, delightful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing what you've learned about this process and helping us all get better at it at the same time.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
I encourage you to stop what you're doing right now and go to wherever it is you buy books, your favorite place to buy books, and pre-order this one right now. You'll have it in your hands in just about 1 week. The book again releases March 19th. And remember, our special session with Elaine happens in just 2 days on Thursday, March 14th, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Your chance to meet Elaine, ask questions of her, maybe something that piqued your interest or curiosity after today's conversation. That all happens in conjunction with a Read to Lead Plus membership. And remember, your first 2 weeks are free. To find out more about it and to make sure you get an invitation to hang out with me and Elaine on Thursday, go to jeffbrown.me and start your free 2-week trial of a Read to Lead Plus membership. That wraps things up for this week. Thank you for being here. Hope to see you next time. Until then, as always, remember, leaders read and readers lead.